Welcome to Buckeye Talk. It is your Thursday edition. It is edition 1.2, actually, of this Thursday edition of Buckeye Talk. I'm Nathan Baird with Stephen Weens. We recorded a whole episode earlier today. We were talking about, in part of that, the wrap-up of Ohio State summer camps and Tavien St Clair and how he'd been hanging around more than Ohio State expected him to, or more than we expected him to at this time last week. And that, maybe you should be on commitment watch and maybe that should be happening soon. And then we stopped recording, and about a half hour later, I think he said, yeah, all right, now. How about now?
Yeah.
Let's commit now. So Ohio State has its second commitment in the 2025 class, but most importantly, it has its quarterback in the 2025 class. So, Stephen, let's start off. Just give us the nuts and bolts of Tavien St Clair from an in-state guy, which is, as you pointed out, first in-state guy, potentially, is if he gets to signing day, be the first in-state guy since Joe Burrow.
Which is hilarious in its own right. Ohio, there's a lot of moving parts here, right? A year ago, I don't think anybody would have said that, hey, who's going to be Ohio State's 2025 quarterback? If you had to make an early prediction right now, who might claim that spot? I don't think anybody would have said Tavien St Clair. And he showed up to a camp last summer and to a 7-on-7 event. He was skinny. He was still tall. I mean, he's 6'3.5", maybe 6'4". He was tall, but he was skinny. He was long and lanky. Wasn't the most athletic kid in the world. Very raw as a passer. It just wasn't there, right? You just didn't see it. You maybe he's a good MAC player, but you're not thinking this is a dude who might be on 5-star watch. And something clicked for him, and I asked him what changed. And really, it's not. Some of it is just these are teenagers who are still growing. He's put on about 40 pounds. He said he played at about 180 last year. He's about 216 right now. But it's the physical growth. But really, he just started looking at himself a little bit differently. He used to walk into places last year and look at some of these top guys and didn't think he could play with them. He didn't have a lot of confidence in himself. And at some point, he just stopped looking at himself as less than and started thinking he could hang with some of those guys. And really, the more he thought that, the more it came into fruition. And so over the last couple of months here, he had started down this path. He's got 25 offers now. About 2 weeks ago, he and his family went through the South and started getting a lot of those offers. Alabama came along. I think Mississippi State came along. I don't think Georgia came along quite yet, but some of these bigger schools started to come along now in a way that I think over the next year, we're going to watch a kid turn into a 5-star recruit, because what I've seen from him, whether it was that Thursday at the fourth day camp of the year or him popping up in the afternoon of the Tuesday day camp, the last day camp, and then what I got to see from him Wednesday, actually spinning, even if you're not hitting, getting to just see him read offenses, make reads, and push the ball down the field. That is a very different quarterback than I saw a year ago. And there are people in this program who agreed with me, which is why it was, we're ready for you to commit whenever you want to commit. And that turns out to be on Wednesday evening as he leaves Ohio State and heads home, finishing runner-up in that 7-on-7 event, to the guy that I think at that point most people would have thought had a better chance of being Ohio State's quarterback. And that's Ryan Montgomery, who's a top 200 recruit in the son of, the brother of current freshman Luke Montgomery. You'd have probably given the leeway to him at that point, and that has very much changed. I think Ryan's still going to be a high-level quarterback with schools like Georgia who are on his tail, but the confidence really clicked in Tavien in a way that it has led to this kind of jump-started rise for a guy who right now is 333. I would expect him to be within the top 200 the next time they update those rankings. And really, by the time we get to signing day next year, so this is a whole another 18 months until he signs, but you feel a lot more comfortable about it because he's an in-state kid. I won't be shocked if he's a 5-star quarterback.
So St. Clair is from Bellefontaine, and by the way, I got all of your texts. I'm pronouncing it correctly, I believe now. I should have known all the time I spent in Indiana, where phonics mean nothing relative to geography. So Bellefontaine, Ohio, so not all that far from Columbus, right? Like we're talking
maybe 45 minutes,
hour and a half.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. So now I'm getting all the texts of not knowing exactly where Bellefontaine is. You You can say first. We'll figure it out over the course of the next couple of years. Um, but as you just alluded to, it wasn't as if it. There was a good chance that Ohio State's drought of signing an in-state quarterback would end with this class, whether it was him,
Hmm.
whether it was Ryan Montgomery. But we've also seen this happen at other positions, and we've seen it happen at quarterback, frankly, in the last couple of years, where Ohio State maybe didn't quite put in the groundwork necessary or get out in front on a guy, and then when they have a maybe surprising opening later, the groundwork is
Hmm.
there's enough time to put in the groundwork. I'm talking about Drew Aller, I guess, is the
There
main
we go.
example of
Yeah.
this, where they tried to get back with him, but he had already moved on to Penn State, and I think that makes sense. So, what was different about that? Is it that we're early enough in the time frame with this being a 2025 signing that Ohio State was able to quickly make up a lot of ground? Had they put in, even when he wasn't this level of prospect, were they putting in the right level of sort of relationship building with the possibility that if he got to this level, they would jump? How do you see that having worked out?
Yeah, he camped a couple of times, and he built a strong relationship with Corey Dennis and Ryan Day, and some of the other guys who are associated with and Fitz and all Paul Fitz and a lot of these other guys. I think I think the big difference between this situation and the Drew Aller situation is Ohio State isn't as sold on this year's Quinn Ewers. And I'm not saying that the perfect recruiting, just the best quarterback in the country. Right? You got the best quarterback in the country a year and a half before signing day. You take him. Especially at that point where Drew Aller was similarly ranked to where Tavien St Clair is right now. But you're sold on Quinn Ewers as a prospect. So you go get Quinn Ewers. And unfortunately, it didn't work out and some things changed, and you had to go back into the pool. But if Quinn Ewers never reclassifies, it doesn't matter what Drew Aller's doing because you're already locked in there. Uh,
Right.
Bryce Underwood is the closest thing to that right now. He's the top quarterback in his class. He's the number 3 player overall. He's from Michigan, though this is not a situation where I think like you choose this kid and then Bryce Underwood ends up at Michigan. I honestly don't think Bryce Underwood even ends up in the Big Ten. I think he might end up in the SEC. I think it might be a similar thing to what we saw with Dante Moore, another Michigan 5-star kid who ended up at UCLA. I think Underwood might be the same way. If you ask the hierarchy of the 3 guys that were seriously considering as the quarterbacks in this class, Tavien St. Clair was number 1. In a way, it doesn't matter what the stars are and the rankings are right now. On their board, Tavien St. Clair was number 1. Drew Aller was never number 1 over Quinn Ewers. Now, see, so that's the difference there. It's not about you got in at the ground level because it's not a situation where you have Bryce Underwood, but you're also continuing to build this in a way that if it goes otherwhere, Tavien's waiting for you. Tavien is your number 1 option in a way that an in-state quarterback hasn't really been a number 1 option in a while. Because I understand Danny Clark was committed here in 2017, but they should have never offered him that early, which is why they moved on for him the way they did to Quinn Ewers. It's been a long time. I don't even know if you would call Joe Burrow the number 1 option in that 2015 class as a quarterback recruit. Maybe the last number 1 option when it comes to in-state quarterbacks was probably Braxton Miller as a 5-star in that 2011 class, which is why he's also the last in-state quarterback where you can say he was truly QB1 at Ohio State. Because you remember, Cardell Jones is the last one to start here, but he came into that job because of what happened to JT Barrett, and then it became a thing here. Joe Burrow, everything that makes him what he is today happened because he didn't win the job at Ohio State. So it's been a decade since they've signed somebody from Ohio. It's been even longer since they've had an in-state Ohio kid truly be considered QB1 at Ohio State. And this is a kid that they think in Tavien St. Clair has the potential to one day be that.
So yeah, 14-year gap maybe in what you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about between the last time that there was an ideal like this in the quarterback room. You've seen him play 3 times or work out at least 3 times in the past week. So this is you're very fresh in your mind. Describe him as a quarterback, describe him as a football player, and does he fit kind of the Ohio State type that they've been working with here in recent years?
Yeah, he's in the same mold. He's not quite CJ Stroudish on that scale there. We always say as he closer to Justin Fields or CJ Stroud with the athleticism. I think we're going to see what Tavien is in this coming quarterback if Kyle McCord wins the job. A guy who's bigger dude in the pocket, strong in the pocket, has a chance to have a really, really strong arm. I think his arm is still growing because he's still learning how to use it. I think there's still some arm strength that needs to be developed there as his mechanics get better. But I think that there's going to be some similarities to what Kyle McCord is as a thrower here. Well, also, I think he's got a little bit of wiggle to him as well. But I think so far we've seen the Justin Fields hat. We're seeing the CJ Stroud hat. And you probably throw Aaron Nolan in that hat as well. Whatever Devin Brown ends up being, it will probably be its own hat. And I think Kyle McCord will end up being its own hat as well. And I think I might throw Tavien St Clair into some comparisons there, even if physically he maybe looks like Dylan Raiola and Patrick Mahomes.
So why do you think ultimately he became the number one guy on their board? And did it have anything to do with, because he had to maybe not surpass Ryan Montgomery, but clearly we were talking last week on this pod that there was some head-to-head basically going on at the day camp. Both those guys were working out, and Ohio State was getting a look at them in succession. And did the fact that maybe there would be a bigger fight for Montgomery have anything to do with this? Or did your read of it, is it just his talents, his skills, and the projection that Ohio State is making is what made him number one on the board?
No, I would say there was a window there where Ryan probably could have pulled the trigger. Right? It's you can't, because some of this is, and I think there's always a lesson to be learned, because I think Jaden Davis has some of the same concept where, and I was talking to a recruit. I was actually talking to a prospect today about that. We were just having a nice conversation about the recruiting game and how it works sometimes. And sometimes we say to these kids, "You have all the time. You have time to make your decision." And they'll come back out. And he came back at me and he said, "I don't have time. I don't have a lot of time to make this decision. There's not that many scholarships, and they fill up fast." Now, if you're talking about receiver, you're talking about some of these positions where there's 3-4 guys on the field. Maybe you do have time, but there are some positions, and he pointed out quarterback and he pointed out running back specifically. And he said, those two spots, you don't have time. You need to find where you fit in, and you need to pick that school and not waste anybody's time, because the longer you wait, somebody may come along that the school you really likes better than they like you. And I'm not saying that's 100% what happened here, but that does happen in recruiting. From a football perspective, there's just a special trait. You hear them say that all the time. There are a few special things about Tavien that, because he's still kind of new to all this and he's still pretty raw, but just the physical makeup and some of the tools that he has in his arsenal that he doesn't even really know how to use yet, that really excited some guys on his coaching staff. Plus, they just think he's a quote unquote, they just think he's a baller, which always, gets you a little bit of juice when you're talking about quarterbacks. But I just think there are some things there that aren't, it felt like with him in comparison to Ryan is a very skilled. Actually, I'm going to use your example again. There's the two guys who run the same time in a 100-meter dash, but one has perfect form and the other one has form where it's like he needs to work on his form. Who's faster? The guy who doesn't have perfect form, right? And that's what it feels like is happening here with Ryan Montgomery and Tavien St Clair within Ohio State's eyes.
Interesting. So it's a second commitment for this class.
Yep.
But it is a little bit behind schedule by Ohio State standards for getting the quarterback for the class, right? But from everything I was hearing from St. Clair today, you were texting this to our texters 614-350-3315 as soon as it left his mouth. He really wanted to get this going. And this is where, all the signs were really pointing to Ohio State at this point, and that this commitment was coming, because he was basically telling people, I want to commit so I can start being the magnet for this class. Or even if he's not a quarterback of that esteem yet, he can still start becoming the leader of this class. He can still start becoming a guy that helps build this class. What did he say about those things today? And what about his personality can help Ohio State build this 2025 class?
Yeah, his exact quote was, "I like to bring people in by committing early. That's now part of my job." And he wants to do that. He wants to be a leader. And I asked him, "Is that because you're a quarterback, and is that because you're Tavien?" And he said, "It's more because I'm Tavien. It's just the type of person he is." He sees the benefit of this. He said, "There is a reason I've been at Ohio State as much as I have the past week and a half. I get good coaching when I come here. So now, like we said, he lives about a 45 minutes to an hour away. He doesn't have to worry about going to visit other schools and go through the recruiting process. He can just come down to Columbus and get coaching when he wants to get that type of coaching. But also, he can put his focus into helping this 2025 class be really good. And really, this is the go back to the 2021 class when they got Jack Sawyer early, 5-star defensive player. They got Kyle McCord, who at the time wasn't a 5-star, but ends up being a 5-star quarterback. Ryan Day has said this: you get your quarterback and you get your defensive guy, and you build around those guys. In 21, they did it perfectly, and it ended up with the number 2 class in the country. They were doing it in 2022 until stuff happened with Quinn. But they had Quinn and they had CJ Hicks, and they started to build around that. In 2023, it went a little sideways because they went about quarterback a little bit different. In 2024, it was supposed to be Aaron Nolan, and the defense was just going to have to take a little bit of time here, but it was supposed to be Aaron Nolan and Garrett Stover. Stover's still here helping to recruit. He finally got a defensive buddy in Peyton Pierce, and then they got another one in Jalen McClain, and the rest of them are going to be coming here in the next couple of weeks. But now you've got Aaron Nolan, who's serving as the quarterback in that class. This is now the second time that they've had a situation where you've had Jonte Gilbert, a 5-star safety, for basically a year now. Once again, you got to continue to hold on to that one because that's a Georgia kid, so we'll see. But you've got that kid, and now you've got your quarterback who might end up being a 5-star, just like Kyle McCord, or at least top 100, top 50 kid. I think he has that type of potential, and the people in that building think he has that type of potential too, which is more important than what anybody any media member thinks. The fact that the coaching staff, who has habitually put out first-round quarterbacks, thinks that is all that matters in this situation. You've got those 2 guys. Now let's start building the rest of the class. Let's go get Heartline's receivers. Let's go get the running backs, the offensive line, the defensive line, the linebackers, and the cornerbacks. I need to go in the class as well.
So let's plot out the quarterback room real quick before we wrap up. So
Yeah.
2023, we know it's going to be either Kyle McCord or Devin Brown. For 2024 starter, both of those options actually would still be on the table. It could be a second year the Kyle McCord starting. It could be a second year Devin Brown starting. It could be a first year Devin Brown starting. There aren't a lot of positions where I think it would be neither of them. So I would say it's probably one of those 2 starting for 2024. 2025 is the first year where you start to think, well, maybe there's a true vacancy on the horizon. Is he someone in St. Clair? Can he come in and compete for that right away? We assume that's actually second year Aaron Nolan's job probably at this point. But what do you see, I guess, as the upside on St. Clair? Does he have the potential? I know you think he's going to climb in the recruiting rankings, but there's the way that this program recruits its quarterbacks, just getting in the top 200 it's good, but it's not that it doesn't separate you in this from the talent in this room, much as it doesn't at a lot of positions, but especially a quarterback. So is this a guy that is potentially on that path to become a starter someday and be thinking about being a first round NFL draft pick the way a lot of these other guys are? Or does he fall somewhere else where it doesn't mean you couldn't still have a productive career, but he may not be, he's going to have to still develop a lot to be the guy who pushes past either the guy they just recruited in the class ahead of him or the guy who may be coming after him.
Yeah, I think he's got starter potential here. I think the way Ohio State recruits its room, it's always going to pop into situations where every so often it's probably best if a guy pulls a Dwayne, right, where he's just good enough to be a 1-year starter and gone. It would be very, very helpful, especially if Kyle McCord wins the job, if he's just like really good enough to be a one and done guy. And it would be very, very helpful again to Ohio State if Devin Brown is the same way. Just because it would be very helpful if they're in a situation where we get to 2025 and now your next multi-year starting quarterback is probably Aaron Nolan in that situation. I don't think that Tavien's good enough to come in here and win the job as a true freshman. I mean, Kyle McCord he was really, really good, and he wasn't good enough to challenge CJ Stroud, who was also a top 100 recruit. I think it's a situation where I won't be shocked if I won't be shocked if he's a 5-star, but I also won't be shocked if he spends his first 2 years being the backup behind a guy like Aaron Nolan. And I think the only difference will be regardless of what his ranking is, because he's from Ohio, I don't think we'll be as keen on the idea of, well, what if he leaves? The same way that we've had those conversations with Kyle McCord because of his background, because he wasn't necessarily from Ohio. I think an in-state guy, just like Joe Burrow would be a little bit more open to sitting in a way that we're not asking him about it as much.
Yeah, we're like, even after the first or second year, it might not be. At some point, it would come to a head. At some point, it would be a conversation, just as it was with Joe Burrow. I'm not sure that Ryan Day would 100% agree with you. I don't know that he knows who his quarterback is going to be yet, but I think he'd be fine with having 2 years of Kyle McCord as the proven better starter option if it worked out that way. You know what I mean? Because he's talked in the past about how the churn kind of gets to you a little bit, and you're getting these guys for like 2 years max, and like the last time he had a 1, it worked out okay for Ohio State. It didn't work out that great for Dwayne Haskins, the late now Dwayne Haskins, as a pro prospect. And I wonder if, we'll see. Everybody's different, but I think he would be okay. I mean, there would obviously be some ramifications for that if Kyle McCord were to stick around. If Kyle McCord won the job and then stuck around for a second year. But that's why you keep recruiting the room the way they do year after year, right? So there isn't a chasm behind him if someone were to leave.
Yeah, I think it comes down. There's pros and cons to everything, and you gotta. What cons are you okay with, or you're not okay with them? But what cons are you willing to live with? Because, I mean, if Kyle stays for 2 years, Devin's probably not staying,
Right.
and if he is staying to not be the starting quarterback until year 4, Aaron Nolan is probably not sticking around for 3 years. Tavien St Clair, even he's probably not. Joe Burrow sticking around for 4 years probably isn't happening again. That's just not. It's not where we're at with quarterback situations anymore. And so you want it. It's the some of what Ryan Day says sometimes is him wanting the best of both worlds. Though it's like, I want the 4-year starting quarterback, but I also want to recruit a quarterback every single year. But I also don't want to. There's
fair.
You can't have the best of everything. And so I take it at it's some of it is taking it as, what do you think they're okay with? What do you know they're okay with? What have they shown you that makes it seem like they would be okay if this happens? Okay, I think he would love to have Kyle McCord for 2 years. I think he would love to have Devin Brown for 2 years. I know what he doesn't want is a situation where we get to 2025 and both of those guys are still here and it runs off what's coming next, because that's going to throw off your room. And then you get to a situation like 2019 where you're an injury away from your entire season going down the drain because it's Justin Fields or behind him. So there's got to be. I think the idea that's been thrown out there of the 1 year of Kyle McCord, 1 year of Devin Brown, and then 2 years of whoever the 2024 guy has always felt like the most seamless way to keep this train rolling.
Yeah, we'll see. I think those families, those quarterbacks will have some individual decisions to make if it were to start unfolding like that. Just as far as what's most prudent for them as prospects. It's weird though, because we've just so come to expect the Ohio State starting quarterback to play at a first round draft pick, Heisman Trophy level pretty much right off the bat. So that makes for an interesting conversation every December or every other December, depending on how you look at it. So that's the update on Tavien St Clair. That is the second commitment for the 2025 class. We have a lot more to talk about with the 2024 class. A lot of that's going to hold till next week, though. We are going to get into one topic, though, as it relates to the 2024 class when we come back from this break, because it's about another quarterback who is not coming to Ohio State, but the impact he could have elsewhere. You're listening to Buckeye Talk.